What led up to the initial riot was the deplorable conditions that existed at Attica State Prison prior to September the 9th, 1971, and other prisons throughout the state of New York.
What kind of conditions were you all against?
Well, people were working for slave labor is one, poor medical treatment, the inability to communicate with people who we wish to communicate with.
You mean you couldn't write letters, or could you call your attorney, that kind of thing, your family?
Well, you couldn't call attorneys, number one. You could write letters, but you was basically restricted to writing letters to your immediate family. People were being going through what you call violation of parole for simple charges. At the prison itself, the food was bad. There wasn't ample educational facilities for us, not ample recreational facilities, and just the role or the relationship between the prison guard, the prison administrators, and prisoners at Attica, as well as other prisons throughout the state of New York. I'd like to state that the incident did occur at Attica, but before that incident, there was an aura or feeling within the air that something would happen in New York State prisons. No one knew what particular prison it would happen at the time. To most people's view, and I speak of prison administrators, they did not perceive that it would happen at Attica. Certain other facilities were cited as where it would possibly happen. So no one know where it would actually be.
Now, was Attica's inmate population primarily African American at that time?
Predominantly.
Okay. Also, wasn't there some long-standing tensions between the prisoners and the warden, maybe more so than in most prison situations?
Well, Mancusi, not just Mancusi, but whoever was the warden or the superintendent at Attica essentially felt that that was a fortress. And so they were very disrespectful, and they disregarded people's rights there. A lot of times you would file a writ, all right, seeking some justice, and they would just tear the writ up. And again, the question of racism, institutionalized racism, was rampant. They kept it going. So definitely there was always a problem there, but particularly with this warden, Mancusi.
Well, Mr. Al-Jundi, would you say it went beyond then punishment for crimes that whatever brought people into the prison to a more racist and aggressive kind of behavior towards the inmates?
See, I think it doesn't matter what you go to prison for. The fact of the matter is, when you go to prison, you're sentenced by a judge to do X amount of years. Okay. And along with the sentence, there are certain rights that are yours. The United States or the United Nations, for example, has conduct or code of conduct that speaks to how prisoners should be treated. It's called minimum standards for treatment of prisoners. And basically, prison administrators in the United States of America basically don't address themselves to those issues. The common thought is that once you are placed in a prison, you essentially don't have any rights that prison officials deem that they have to respect. And so, most of us who are imprisoned are far away from our homes, far away from our loved ones, and so people cannot rush to the prisons as readily as possible to deal with some of the circumstances. So
your life is up for grabs then?
Yeah, it's essentially we are at a disadvantage.
All right, well, I know that people in the community have mixed feelings. I listen to the callers. I get people calling in. You know, they did this in my neighborhood. They did that. They deserve whatever they get. But this situation at Attica has been described as the bloodiest encounter between Americans since the Civil War. And can you tell me a little bit about what happened during the riot? I understand that 150 officers of different branches of officialdom attacked, and some 450, is that right, Attorney Deutsch, rounds were spent?
No, there was over 2,200 rounds of ammunition fired.
450 shots.
Well, it's hard to say because they used shotguns with double-O buckshot, and each round of a shotgun contains between 8 and 12 individual pellets. And they also used dum-dum bullets, which are prohibited by the Geneva Convention, which enter the body and then expand, and they're like deer slugs. And it varies, but they say there was about 2,500 individual missiles, either pellets or dum-dum bullets, fired against essentially unarmed prisoners on September 13th.
And the official reports, did they say at first that the people who died of knife wounds, slit throats, and that turned out to be false? Is that
right? What they said when the riot first happened, it started out as a riot, but then it really turned into a rebellion where the prisoners elected leadership, where they expressed certain demands about their conditions, their human rights, basic human rights, as Akil talked about the various problems there, and they asked to negotiate some changes in their life there. And after 4 days of these negotiations, the state basically terminated the negotiations and went in there. And there were 10 hostages that were killed. And at first the state said that the inmates had slit the throats of the hostages, and that's how they died. And they announced this to the world, and it was front page in all the newspapers. And then the autopsies were performed, and it was determined that each hostage died from a bullet from the state police or correctional officers. And even after they had that information, they tried to get another pathologist to perform the autopsy again, saying that the first pathologist must be a communist because he said this. Of course, the second pathologist said the same thing, that the hostages had died from bullets and not from their throats being slit. So that lie was exposed. But even to this day, there are many people who still believe that the hostages died because the inmates slit their throats.
based on those early reports?
Exactly.
All right, our number is 591-5990. This is Sylvia Ewing, and joining me this evening, our attorney Michael Deutsch on the live line, who is representing inmates, former inmates, and I believe families as well, who were killed or involved in some way in the Attica massacre, and also Mr. Akil Al-Jundi, who was in Attica at the time. I'd like to find out a little bit about how the story played out as far as the prisoners organizing themselves, and I believe there were black Muslim guards who were responsible for guarding the hostages. Tell me a little bit about those days when you were negotiating and what some of the demands were, Mr. Al-Jundi.
Well, before I do that, let me take the responsibility to address something that you mentioned earlier.
And what was that?
Which was the question of how people in the community would state that prisoners have done things against the community, so whatever happens to them in prison is justified or justifiable.
Mm-hmm.
I think that as a member of the African American community, I live in New York in the South Bronx. I think that it's a question that we have to be concerned with the role of crime in the black community. But I think that the basic situation is this. We are sent to prison.
Okay.
Predicated upon violations in the community, and I guess, as the state would say, violation against the state. We're sent to do time. And while we are doing time, we are human beings.
Okay.
As we were before. People would say that some of us acted not like human beings.
Mm-hmm.
All right? But the fact of the matter is that we are human beings. And so as human beings, we have rights that everyone and anyone must respect. irrespective of where we are housed at. So what happens to us in prison, because we went to prison, is no justification for people to maltreat us.
Okay.
All right? I need to establish that first and foremost.
And I know you're currently continuing as an activist for prisoners' rights.
That is part of my task here in the United States of America.
Okay.
Around the question of the rebellion at Attica, again, some of the demands was for the question of decent wages. We asked for the minimum wage as opposed to slave wages that we received.
What did you
People
receive?
worked, prior to Attica, people worked for up to like 16 to 25 cents per day.
Okay.
All right? And we worked from, in most cases, 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning until like 3 o'clock or after in the afternoon. So we put in long hours, all right, and we made the prison system profitable, but none of those profits reaped into our pockets. So that was one question. The question of poor medical attention was a factor. A lot of prisoners, just as in the street, went to the prison doctors, and most of the times when they went to the doctors, what they received from them is what's called APC, or all-purpose capsules, basically aspirins for every and any ailment that you happen to have. It was the question of on visits. There was screens that if your mother or your wife or your sister or your brother or your father came to see you, you couldn't touch them. You had to look at them through
A glass.
you know, the glass or the screen. All right. Not only that, there was poor educational situation in the prison. The thing that helped to perpetuate that is the underlying factor around the question of recidivism. It is expedient for prisons throughout the United States of America to not provide prisoners with the proper education. It is proper for them to not provide you with the proper vocational trades, because if when you are released from prison, having have the stigma as a prisoner first and foremost, having that the ability to get decent jobs, then people will commit crimes because people have to survive.
So
and
you
so
mean it's
what
a lifelong customer?
And prisons are one of the biggest industries in the United States of America. As we sit here on September the 20th, 1991, I dare say to you that in the United States of America, they've gotten to a system now that's called privatization of prisons, particularly in the Midwest, where Chicago happens to be, and also in the South, where big businesses are taking over prisons, and people have to pay for their board and their food, etc. And the problem with that is people are sent to prison to do time, but they end up doing the time and have to pay for their stay as well. Somebody needs to seriously deal with that question.
All right, I know that's a serious question, and it's a broad indictment of the prison system. Basically, breaking down what I hear you saying, it's in the best interest of prison officials as businessmen to keep their customers coming and not to give them the tools that may help them not come back to prison.
See, I don't know so much it's just a broad indictment. It is an indictment, but it's an indictment that's larger than the prison system. It's an indictment against the state itself. See, it's proper for this type of stuff to happen because who predominantly goes to prisons? Blacks and Hispanic people and poor white folks. You don't see too many rich white folks going to prison. And if you do see them going to prison, they end up with a little bit of time, and they end up in some of the plush facilities and throughout the country. But the fact of the matter is that not only don't we get appropriate education in our communities, we don't. The unemployment rate is high for black folk, and for the black youth, it is the highest in the country. But along with that, there's the closing down of hospitals in our neighborhoods, closing down of clinics, cutback in Medicaid, etc.
I'm going to interrupt you because you know that's something. If you were a WVON listener in Chicago, you'd hear lots of people in our community agreeing with you. I mean, this is the voice of our community, and that's something that we hear a lot about, and we have no disagreement there. I'd like to just read a little something that I got from People's Law Office that reports that on the morning of Thursday, September 9th, 1971, moved by a long train of abuse of their rights and their basic humanity, the population of prisoners at Attica erupted into a full-scale rebellion. Beginning spontaneously at many sites in the prison, the mutiny progressed to a point by early afternoon, some 1,200 prisoners were gathered in one of the exercise yards with several dozen hostages. Now, this was the question I was getting to your organization. A number of hostages who had been injured were released, and the remaining 39 were moved into a large circle in the middle of the yard where a group of black Muslim prisoners were organized to guard and protect them. So for the following 4 days, the hostages were fed and protected. There wasn't abuse or torture or anything like that. Were there leaders among you? How did this kind of organization come about?
Well, in prisons, just as there is in the street, there's organization. The reason why the Muslims had the responsibility of guarding the hostages is because the Muslims were the most disciplined element within the prison system. And we have to realize that the hostages are the prize.
Right.
All right? That's our first prize. So in a situation such as this, you don't want anything to happen to your first prize. So the people who are most disciplined were given the responsibility to handle that.
Well, I think we've got a caller on the line, Attorney Deutsch and Mr. Al-Jundi. Let's see what they have to say, and our number is 591-5990 if you want to join us in our discussion on Attica. Hi, you're on the line.
Hello?
Hi, how are you?
Okay.
Who am I talking with?
Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Yeah, what I'm going to say is not going to make me the most popular brother maybe tonight. But we is not so much maybe as a black race, as a black people, as black men. We seem to be suffering from delusions of grandeur and hypocrisy as well as disrespect. Now,
in what way?
You talk about, the gentleman talks about lack of rights in prison, but yet and still you get callers coming on the radio and they'll tell you in a minute, it's no freedom out here. You know, you get women, they'll call up, and they can't even go out their door tonight.
That's true.
That 1970 and 1960 type of rhetoric would have worked 20 years ago. And before I even go into any kind of spiel, let me say I'm not anti-brother. What I'm saying, the actions of the few negative criminal brothers make it bad on the rest of us brothers out here. You talk about conspiracies and everything. When the Ku Klux Klan, and I just got through looking at this picture on 50, but when they formed up, that was a conspiracy, and if black men in the North had got together, underground or otherwise, with black men in the South, maybe we could have a little bit more standing today with our sisters out here that's working and can't go out, and when they walk home, they looking all around and over their shoulders, and then you get sisters now calling for the death penalty. Now, the gentleman talks about rights, prisoners' rights and everything. You go into some of these other countries where they're shooting them on sight. They line them up against the wall and everything. They talk about, food in these prisons and everything. And you read about kids out here starving to death and homeless people, trying to beg for anything they can get. Now, he just said that if they make them pay, to go to prison, maybe that might be one of the solutions. Maybe if they have to finally pay and work from 7 o'clock at night in the morning till 7 o'clock at night, maybe they won't go.
All right, Mike. I hear what you're saying, and I'm not surprised at what you're saying.
I'll say one other thing.
What's that?
A lot of these so-called brothers can no longer run and hide behind these religions and these so-called discipline units, because it's a shame and a disgrace before God that a black man has got to go and get put in a cage like a monkey before he gets some kind of discipline about himself.
All right, Mike. Well, you stay strong, and thanks for your call. Mike has some strong feelings about it. But, you know, no matter what people say again about crime and punishment, and I do want to hear what you have to say, the aftermath, people being tortured, people being killed, and the blame being put on the wrong side, even when it was a lie that could be found out, that's not a conspiracy theory, Mike. That's an actuality. And so we've got to look at the history of things and learn, but also I hear what you're saying. Attorney Deutsch, is this the kind of defense or platform that you think the prosecution is going to play off of as well?
Well, the people that are being sued, we're the prosecution, and essentially we're bringing the lawsuit for damages for the...
Oh, you're right.
And they're the defense, they're defending. But it's true that their view is to try and paint the prisoners as something less than human to justify the inhumane actions of the state. Because remember, what the state did at Attica was they slaughtered 39 unarmed people, their own people as well. 10 of their own people were shot down. They didn't provide any medical care for the injured prisoners after they were shot, and many of them bled to death waiting for medical care. And then they systematically tortured over 1,200 prisoners. They made them run through glass nude and through a gauntlet of axe-wielding correctional officers. They singled out the leaders and they tortured them with lit cigarettes and cigars they put out on their bodies. They hit them repeatedly all over their bodies. They broke arms and legs, etc. So we can debate the causes of crime and whether people in prison deserve to be in prison, but there's no one, I think, can say that it's right to torture people or to shoot unarmed people or to let people bleed to death. And in the end, that's really what the Attica lawsuit is about, to really make those people who are responsible for that type of criminal behavior accountable. We have to hold people accountable even if it's 20 years later, because if we don't, this type of inhumane, horrific behavior is going to happen again. And I don't think there's anyone, no matter how conservative or how pro-law and order, can justify this type of treatment of people.
All right, let's go back to the lines, although I think you may have answered in a question about why this is important. We'll go to the lines and then back to Mr. Al-Jundi here in the studio. Hi, you're on Target.
How are you?
I'm fine, thanks for calling.
Good. I agree with the last caller. With all of the problems that we're having in this city, not only all over the United States, I don't think that they could have any tougher punishment other than what this man is saying. I think what's missing is that these people who are now doing it, they're not aware of how prisoners are being treated. I can't see how trying to justify somebody that's killed somebody and say they're not being treated properly. I think that they're treating prisoners too good, because too many people are committing crime. They're not afraid of the police, and I have no sympathy at all for prisoners, especially people who try to take advantage of other people. You see?
What's your name, caller?
My name is Eddie.
Hi, Eddie.
How are you?
I'm fine. I don't know. We may have talked before.
We've talked a few times, but I'm not in favor of helping prisoners at all, especially if they've committed a crime. What I would like to see, it become published. Each time a prisoner is misused is to let these other guys out here snatching purses realize that if they do get caught, they're going to go under some severe punishment. It's time out of us taking up for these people who are actually hurting the black community. All of these problems is in the black community. I cannot go out of my house or get caught in a black neighborhood after dark because I'm a type of person who work, who got a nice car, and look good. And these guys they don't look at me as a brother. They look at me as somebody they can rip off. And
like you might be a target, you
I'm
think?
a target. Of course I'm a target because look like I have money.
But Eddie, let me ask you, do you remember Attica?
Who?
Do you remember the Attica riots?
No, I don't.
You're a younger man.
Right. What do you mean?
Well, you know, 20 years ago, you may not have been checking out the news.
I wasn't aware, 20 years ago, I wasn't aware of all of the problems that we're having at this point. I just began to try to, find out what's happening. You see what I'm saying? I was sort of away from the things, you know.
All right.
But this man should be ashamed of himself trying to help prisoners. I mean, we have too many problems.
All right, thanks for your call. We have to take a break, but Eddie said one important thing. He's just trying to find out, and that's what we want to do is find out what happened, because I think it's historically important. Call me at 591-5990. When we come back, Mr. Akil Al-Jundi will respond to some of these questions.
Back to On Target, your host, Sylvia Ewing. Our phone number, 591-5990, here on AM 1450 WVON.
Hi, everybody. We're back on Target. Glad you can join me this evening. Turn off the TV. I know you've got current concerns about crime, but we are going to take a little minute to go back in history and talk about something that happened a while ago in 1971, but the lawsuit is going on today. Now, Mr. Al-Jundi, you heard some callers who were not sympathetic. What do you have to say in response to their statements?
First and foremost, I'm glad that they will take the responsibility to call and to air their views. I think that there's no monolithic view in the community around the question of prisons or the question of crime. The first caller spoke about the question of sisters having fear to go out their houses.
That's right.
And the overall issue for me, I think, is, because around even what the second caller talked about, is the question of black on black crime.
Right.
I think that those of us who commit crimes in the community, that we have to be responsible to our community for what we did.
Okay.
One of the ways the state addresses is to sentence you to do time.
Okay.
I think that what has to happen, though, is while we are in prisons, we have to come to grips with certain factors. And the community itself has a responsibility as well.
And
Because, well, what's that? I think that the community needs to look at what happens to people in the community prior to going, overall, what happens to people who go to prison, what happens to them while they're in prison, and what is their relationship when they come back to the community. All right? And there are some people who will come out of prisons and will still be doing things against the community. But there are a lot of brothers and sisters who go to prisons, and yes, they made a mistake, but are ready to adjust. Willing to have paid their debt to society, and are willing to come out to the community and said, listen, when I was in the community, I did X amount of things that was incorrect, all right? But now, having been to prison, I've learned a lot. And it's a question of self-education and self-rectification, and a saying that now I'm ready to be an upstanding person in the community, and you need to give me an opportunity to do so. So
you have to live through prison to do it too.
And see, there needs to be a mending.
That's a good word.
There needs to be a mending between those who leave the community for doing wrong and coming back to the community, and the people in the community, because the fact of the matter is that we're going to come back to the community. What we do when we come back is the question. And I think that if we make the community available for a healing process in many cases, that a lot of brothers and sisters can be assets to the community. I'm sitting here tonight as a living example of that. I went to prison for killing somebody at the age of 20. I came out when I was 35 years old of age. But the things that I do today, the things that I have been doing while I was in prison, the things that I have been doing the last 16 years since I've been released from prison are attestation to the fact of the matter that there are some brothers and sisters who can go to prison and come out and be functional and be an asset to the community.
And even after the retaliation and the torture, what kind of effect did the aftermath of Attica leave on you?
Well, the aftermath of Attica is always indelible. But for me, it also provided me with some strength and fortitude to do the things that I'm doing now. The second brother talked about the fact that he got a car and he looked well and he got money and he's worried about people robbing him. And well, I don't have a car, right? But I work every day.
Okay.
All right, and I make money working legally. I'm a social worker myself. All right. I went to prison, came out of prison, went to school, and now I'm doing this stuff because I think it's a way of repaying my debt to society at large, but to my community, and helping brothers and sisters so that they don't have to go through the same thing that I went through.
And what is it that you want people to remember about Attica, and what is it that you want out of the lawsuit?
What I want people to remember about Attica is that poor people were mistreated, and they had the temerity to address that mistreatment because they wanted human rights, and that all of us, irrespective of what stage of life we happen to be, rich or poor, lumpen or proletarian, whatever, we all want human rights. What I want out of the suit, I want the suit to be able to make the state admit the murders that they committed, the brutal injuries that many of us sustained. I want them to admit it, and I want a jury to find them guilty, and I'm looking for reparations, $2.8 billion.
You know, I think all of us are looking for reparations. Let's go right to the lines. Hi, thanks for holding. You're on Target.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi, my name is Valerie.
Hi, Valerie.
And I just have a comment to make. Listening to the gentleman that you have there, I don't remember Attica. I think I was too young at the time. But he's speaking with a lot of healing power. He seems to be dealing with an issue that's even broader than just what happened there. It's just how people were treated. I read in the newspaper and in my history books that when America goes to war with other countries, they have like some type of contract, whereas when they get those prisoners, they will treat them decently a certain way.
Geneva Convention, you're right, Valerie.
But we come to America, and we're in America, and just because we go to jail, black, white, or whatever, then we get treated horribly. But when we capture another country, we treat them as if they're guests. And why can't we treat each other that way? Not as if they're guests, but, you know, try to give us something to heal the problem instead of just beat us down.
All right, Valerie, thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Stay strong. Let's go right back to the lines. Hi, you're on Target.
Hi.
Who's this?
This is Lori.
Hi, Lori.
I called to talk about something else, but when you talk about a soldier and a criminal, I mean, if President Bush orders my husband or my son or whatever to go overseas, or another leader over there orders their young men, sometimes it's mandatory that they serve time. That's altogether different than somebody running around out here committing crimes on their own. So there should be some kind of understanding that because these men are not necessarily there on their own. Sometimes that country, it's mandatory that they go to a war, whatever.
So you're saying there's a difference?
Yes, of course there is. Now, what I was thinking, remember Attica, the television cameras, what I remember most was the day before, I think, when they interviewed one young man. They would, you know how they would go in every once in a while and let them talk.
Yeah, they were on the air for days.
Right, and this man said, though, he says, everybody out there, get your lives together, because he says within the next 24 to 48 hours, most of us are going to die. And I was thinking, some of those men in that institution were not even part of this, organizing the riot or whatever.
That's true.
And they were innocent people. I wish there was some kind of a lawsuit that for those families who lost their young men because they were not a part of it, and file a lawsuit against the ones who started all this stuff. And another thing, this young man said that you're interviewing there said that he only spent 15 years for taking another person's life. And it sounds like an Islamic name that he had. Now, if he was in an Islamic country and he had committed that crime, they would have probably killed him. And Sylvia, I'm calling because I just don't understand how these people can get the nerve to talk about their food wasn't tasty or their TVs didn't work properly or something. To me, I wish there could be some kind of conditions that would be so uncomfortable and so bad that these people would not want to go back. I think it must be too easy. It must be.
All right, Lori, thanks for your call, and keep listening because, Attorney Deutsch, this is a lawsuit on behalf of all the inmates, isn't it?
Yes, it's on behalf of all the people, all the prisoners that were in the yard on September 13th. Those that wanted to be there, those that didn't want to be there. Those that were leaders, those that were followers.
Briefly, because our lines are totally lit up, wasn't there one prisoner who was interviewed maybe on NPR who was not involved in the uprising but was tortured, beaten about the testicles? Do you know who I'm referring to?
Well, the one that was on NPR is named Frank Big Black Smith, who was tortured and was beaten repeatedly around the testicles, but he was part of the rebellion, and he was in the yard as part of the rebellion. There were prisoners that were there because they had nowhere else to go, because once the riot happened, prisoners went out into the yard because that was the only place they could really go. But the point of it is, and I think this is important to respond to the last caller, it was not the fellow prisoners that were responsible for the deaths of those that didn't want to be there or those that didn't want to be there. These people were killed by the state police, and they were killed, they were unarmed, and many of them were surrendering, many of them were doing nothing but just lying there hoping not to get killed, and they were killed in cold blood. So I think it's a little bit facetious to say that the prisoners who were there against their will should file a lawsuit against the prisoners who somehow had the foresight to raise up and say, we want to be treated as men, not as beasts. I think it's also important to understand that, as Akil said, is that most people who go to prison are going to come out again. And I don't think you stop people from committing crime by treating them so bad in prison they don't want to go back to prison. I think that's really counterproductive. You stop people from committing crime by teaching them a skill when they go to prison, by giving them some education and giving them some hope so when they come out of prison they can get a job and don't have to go back to a life of crime.
All right, Michael, let's go right back to our lines. Hi, you're on Target.
Yes, hello.
How you doing?
I agree with these guys. We must treat our men in our penal institutions humanely. But they must understand that in this point in time in history, with 12 years of Republican rule, that with our mothers cannot go to the store or can not walk down to the street, and our grandmothers cannot go to the currency exchange, even though you all are correct. this point in time, at least in the 90s, the way they got things, while society, black poor and white poor, when the middle class is disappearing, and it's going to get tougher, it's going to be very tough out here. When they're letting go of guys out of prison, and 300,000 guys in this state off with general assistance, it's going to get worse out here.
It sure is. What's your name, caller?
Edgar. And what I'm saying, they're bothly correct. Them guys should not have went through that in Attica. They should be treated humane, and that the lawyer is perfectly right. But Republican rule have got the whole system frustrated and confused, and got everybody at each other for jobs, housing, and cities and everything, and everybody is at each other's throat, while the higher echelon and the elite and the 20% of ruling class is controlling this society and getting the whole what they call America into a nosedive, and nothing is getting done as jobs being exported, and it's going to get very much rougher out here.
Thanks, Edgar. Boy, Edgar put his finger on it. It is getting rough and continuing to be rough. Let's go back to the lines and talk to another caller. Hi, you're on Target. Once, twice. Okay, let's go on. Hi, you're on Target.
Hello?
Hi.
Yes. I don't know who there are two people there, right? One's a
Michael Deutsch on the line, the attorney, and Akil Al-Jundi in the studio.
Yes, I would like to respond to the gentleman in the studio. First, let me say that, the mistreatment of prisoners, in terms of Attica, I do remember when that happened, and I think a lot of men who were innocent in terms of the riot, were killed, and certainly that's terrible. I would like to ask the gentleman there, Akil, is that his name?
Yes.
Yes, Akil, in terms of when you were in prison, how many men were in prison that you would say who had just done what we might consider to be minor crimes and had been sent up for doing things which were not really what we would consider worthy of going to prison? How many men in the population were really victims of that?
Okay, I don't have the statistics in front of me this evening. I did bring it with me. It's in my suitcase. But a significant amount of people were in prison for what we call minor crimes.
Well, see, significant doesn't help me very much. 50%, 40%, 30%?
I would say something like about 25, 30.
Okay, here's my point, and my brother, I don't really want to make you feel bad, but I do...
I don't feel bad.
But I do want to respond to you in a way which I think maybe a lot of people who were listening maybe feel the same way.
And briefly, because we're coming up on news.
Okay. It seems to me that a lot of the things, the demands or the things that you felt, the men in prison should have had, are things that I work from 7 o'clock in the morning until often maybe 9 and 10 o'clock at night to achieve, through work, okay, through working hard. And since the situation out here is what it is, and like the gentleman explained, it's going to get worse, how do we get around the fact that the brothers are out there doing these things, terrorizing people? I don't go out of my house in the evening at all without being accompanied myself. In other words, when you do something, the world is cause and effect, and when you do a crime for the 70% of men who were there for good reason.
All right, that's very well put. Everybody, stay tuned for After the News. Caller, please listen in. We'll be back in about 6 minutes.
For WVON, Midway Broadcasting Corporation, or our participating sponsors.
Tune in to the only nighttime talk show that matters, On Target, 10 p.m. nightly on AM 1450 WVON, the talk of Chicago.
Welcome back to On Target. Your host, Sylvia Ewing. Our phone number, 591-5990, here on AM 1450 WVON.
And we're back, Chicago. Sylvia Ewing here to serve you. Thanks, Art. And I will be serving you again on September 28th at Kennedy King College. We'll be having the second annual Seniors Breakfast. Seniors get in free, and it's only $2.50 for those under 65. And all of the WVON on-air personalities, and I'll be modest and say people who serve you, will be the waiters for the day. There'll be a fashion show, blood pressure screenings, and more. So come on out and join us. Okay, Akil, they've been giving you their best shot. Why don't you respond to some of the comments you've heard so far?
I think the comments that we heard tonight was important. I think that it reflected some of the views within the black community and in other communities as well. But I think that the overall issue is that people need to realize that irrespective of whatever people who have been charged with crimes have done, that they are human beings first and foremost. And I want to say this not to be disrespectful, but one of the things we have to also realize that many of us have families, and we can cast indictments on other people now, but what would be our view when someone in our family happens to be in that same situation? I work with an organization in Brooklyn, New York that's called the Community Self-Defense Program, and one of our particular tasks is to deal with the question of black-on-black crime, because, see, I could never sit here tonight or any place in the world and tell people that it's proper for some of the things that we do to go on.
Okay.
I could never do that. It wouldn't be respectful to myself, but it wouldn't be respectful to our people as a whole, those who are past and those who are alive. So yes, the community does have a responsibility to look at the overall question of how those people in the community who do things, how we can change them. All right, and those people who do stuff, we need to sit down and think about why do we do the things that we do and what we need to do in order to not have people thinking about us in the manner which they do think about us.
And I just want to say, you're from the South, or from the Bronx. You are no stranger to some of the conditions that people have been calling about, because that's not a walk in the park.
No.
All right, let's go back to the lines. I know you'll have to be leaving us later, but we'll keep going for now. Hi, thanks for holding you on the air.
Hello?
Hi.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I may sound cruel, but when I hear black men or black women thinking about the criminals that are in jail and not thinking about how they got in jail, and thinking about we are begging, still begging for recognition on things when we don't even vote anymore, and we worry about a criminal so much, it means that we're not thinking about the families at home that are being kept inside because of the criminals. Because if we were, each family would check their house to see if the kids got guns. It is absolutely ridiculous to be sitting up here talking about somebody in prison when we got kids dying on the street and parents don't even look at and see what they bring into the house.
All right, thanks for your call. I think you were talking about how people got in prison.
Yeah, I think that sometimes people are fixed with ideas and they don't pay heed to what's being said. But what I like to do, because we don't have so much time to deal with this stuff tonight, tomorrow at DePaul University from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. there'll be some workshops at the Stewart Center. Some of the issues would be true purposes of prisons, control unit prisons, what we've learned about prisons organizing in the 20 years since the Attica Rebellion. At 5 to 7, there'll be delicious food served by the Puerto Rican community. From 7 until 10 o'clock p.m., there'll be a movie on Attica. One of our attorneys, Michael Deutsch, who's from Chicago, and myself will be at Schmidt Center, 2323 North Seminary Street. And we will deal with the questions that people think are important, because I understand that you cannot answer all the questions tonight. But the fact of the matter is that we are thinking, it's not about just people in prison that I'm here about. I'm about dealing with the things that affect us in our communities and how we can make the community a safer and better place for all of us to reside at, not just old folks, but young folks, old folks, and young folks.
And what do you think about the one caller's comment that you had some healing statements? Does it discourage you when you hear people who don't hear that in your message and who just are pained by the crime that they're victims of?
I think that people are so overwhelmed by the pain, and they don't see that there is such a thing as a healing process. In a lot of cases, they don't run into in contact with people who they see are making that adjustment that will make them feel that maybe we need to be a little bit sensitive and sympathetic to our brothers and sisters who are not as fortunate as we are. But time is a factor, and if those of us who are in prison, if we are true to ourselves and we are true to the community in the long run will see it, and they will respond favorably.
Well, thank you for sharing with us. Michael Deutsch, you're going to stay on the line? Okay, because we've still got callers. We'll continue to talk about Attica for a little bit, but later on we're going to talk with Alderman Beavers about the cabs, the killing of another cab driver recently, and later we're going to look at a strong black institution, the church choir. That's right. But right now, let's go right back to the lines. Hi, you're on Target.
Hi. Hello?
Yes?
Hi. I just listened to maybe the last 15 minutes of the program, so I probably missed quite a bit.
You gotta turn off that TV, but thanks for tuning in.
Hello? I don't have a TV on.
Okay.
No, there's no noise in my background.
No, I meant if you listen to the last 15 minutes.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Okay. What I was calling about was, I sense a kind of dilemma in the black community, and it seems as though, listening to the gentleman that just left, that we cannot make up our minds in the community whether criminals are victims or perpetrators. And I think that the black community is going to have to come to some very, very tough decisions, and we're going to have to use a form of tough love. I mean, it's all right to be sensitive. It's all right to say criminals are human beings, but the bottom line is criminals, as well as anybody else, have limited rights. Once they violate someone else's rights, their rights have to be diminished or terminated. Now, the way I feel about it is knowing that I cannot go outside my house at night, that I have trouble getting out of my house, going to my car because I leave at 6 in the morning and it's still dark, and it's a trauma for me every morning. I have lost my sympathy for this kind of attitude of, well, the criminal is sensitive and the community owes him some responsibility toward him. Personally, what I think we're going to have to do in the black community is we're going to have to say, if you're here, if you have problems, we'll try to help you, but you have to help yourself. You have to do it yourself like everybody else, and if you don't behave, we're going to take you out. And I really think that's the attitude we're going to have because, quite frankly, a person that does not want to do right, you cannot rehabilitate that person. That person has to rehabilitate themselves.
Well,
and in our community, it's too much of it.
I appreciate your presenting your thoughts in such a concise and, well put together manner. Let me just ask you a quick question, though. Are you familiar with what happened in Attica? Do you have any recollection of that or hearing about it?
I remember. I was young. I do remember something about it. I do remember that it did seem to be kind of a free-for-all for the state police. As far as and see, there is such a thing as wrong. I mean, nobody. To me, a criminal is anyone who violates someone else's rights, whether they're wearing a state policeman's uniform or whether they're wearing, gangbangers.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for your comment. I'm going to get to Attorney Deutsch, but the lines have been lit up. We're talking about Attica, but everybody really wants to talk about how bad the situation is now, but let's go right back to the line. Hi, you're on Target.
How you doing?
Okay.
Yes, I would like to make a comment concerning your guest.
Okay.
Okay. He's talking about what they served him in prison and how he was treated. Well, what about the victim that he killed? They have no right. He took him out. They 6 feet under, and I think.
Whoa! Well, I'll have to do it after the fact, Art. Beep. Attorney Deutsch, how can you put in historical perspective what you're trying to accomplish with the Attica class action suit brought on behalf of the 39 people killed and all the inmates and their families with the current realities and the attitudes in the community?
Well, I mean, I think it's a difficult situation. I'm a lawyer. I'm not a member of the black community, but I understand, and I'm certainly sympathetic to the rampant crime that is occurring in the community and the lack of sympathy for people who are criminals. And that's certainly understandable. But as that woman said before the last caller, it doesn't matter whether you wear a state police officer's uniform or a gangbanger's uniform. If you violate people's rights, you're a criminal. And what the state did in Attica was to shoot down unarmed men and torture helpless, defenseless men without any justification, without any right in law. And if we're worried about crime and we're worried about people who violate rights, then we have to be worried about state-sanctioned crime. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to hold the people who are in charge, those who are the supervisors, accountable for allowing this state-sanctioned crime to go on, and also to compensate the families who lost their loved ones. Many people who were killed at Attica were going to get out of prison within the next 2 or 3 years. They were going to go back to their community. They were going to go back and hopefully live productive lives. They are dead now, and their families have never been compensated for that loss. And that's the other purpose of the lawsuit.
Well, also, one of the purposes that I wanted to bring it up is I'm always fascinated by news stories and involved accounts, and this one has many, many intricate elements which we haven't really been able to address. One of the things that is unbelievable about the situation, but it happened, is that I guess during this 4-day period, as negotiations were going on, it wasn't just like immediate a riot and then immediate violence. Observers were sent to see what the situation was, and they themselves started getting worried and thinking that something horrible was going to happen at Attica, and tried to get Governor Nelson Rockefeller to come to the prison. Is that the case?
Yeah, essentially, there were many people who were called as observers to come and help resolve the situation. Congressmen, attorneys, clergy, and after a couple of days of negotiation, they saw the state police massing. There was a tremendous amount of racial hatred being focused against the prisoners and even against those people who were observers who were going into the prison. And they saw that a massacre was about to happen, that the state police and the correctional officers were just itching to go in there. And they called the governor on the phone, and they urged him to come, not to go into prison, but to just meet with the observers outside the prison as a sign that they were going to try and resolve the thing peaceably. And essentially, Rockefeller's position was that it was politically not feasible for him to appear to come to the prison because it would look like he was being too lenient to the prisoners, and it would hurt his political aspirations. Because remember, at that time, Rockefeller was still pursuing his road to be the president of the United States, and he was always worried whether he appeared hardline enough about law and order. And he essentially told these men, these observers who called him, I cannot do that. Politically, it's impossible for me to do that. I'm getting a lot of pressure from law enforcement throughout the state and the country not to accede to any type of activity that way, and I'm going to have to order the state police to go in there and retake the prison.
And after those police went in, I read something that was part of a McKay commission, which studied all the facts after the fact. And I'll just share it with our audience. It said that almost every doctor interviewed by the commission expressed personal chagrin that the medical service had been called in only after the shooting stopped, and that no adequate planning had been made beforehand for the evacuation and treatment of casualties. They said that none of them were briefed as to what to expect, and they were astonished that the large quantities of equipment and supplies they needed had not been stockpiled in advance.
Yeah, that's another claim in our lawsuit, the failure to provide medical care for the prisoners. Essentially, they knew they were going in. They knew they were going in with heavily armed masses of police who had their total discretion when to fire and not to fire. There were no orders to fire. Was left up to each individual officer with a gun when to fire, when to stop firing, and yet they made no provisions for medical care for the wounded. The only provisions they made were for the hostages who were taken out of the prison immediately and rushed to emergency room hospitals nearby. The prisoners who were shot laid in the yard bleeding, and the first prisoner was not allowed to leave the prison until 8 hours after the assault was over. So, it was clear that they didn't really care about the lives of the prisoners.
Okay, let's go back to the lines. I wanted to get a little more information out there because there are a few people who didn't know the details about Attica. Hi, you're on Target.
Hello?
Hi.
Yes. What they're talking about to me is incredible. The state cannot allow prisoners to take over a prison. And the idea of negotiating with them, that's ridiculous. They are there to be punished. They are not there to be treated like children. And this man who was a prisoner, he's talking about reparations for himself. What reparations is he going to give the family of the person he killed?
Well, thanks a lot for your views. Let's keep going. Hi, you're on Target.
Good evening, Sylvia, and to your guest.
Hi, who am I speaking with?
Marilyn.
Oh, hi, Marilyn.
I'm afraid I'm white, and I'm not black, and I don't live in the Afro-American community.
Well, you're allowed to listen and join in.
Well, that's just what I'm doing, and I have to admit that I share a lot of the same opinions and feelings that your callers have called in. And let me try to explain in a very short minute or two, if I can get my point across. The people out here working and trying to do the so-called right thing have now come to the conclusion that, the laws are there to protect the guilty rather than the innocent. For instance, I'm not familiar and I don't know all the particulars of this Attica riot, but I would think that none of these atrocities would have occurred if the riot hadn't taken place in the first place.
All right, Marilyn. Well, I want to try and get a couple more callers in, but I appreciate your making it clear and making it to the point. Let's see what our next caller has to say. Hi, you're on Target.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes. Since we're talking about prisons right now...
Well, we were talking about Attica, and now we're really talking about prisons.
Okay, well, okay. I would like to let the listening audience know that right now in America there's a situation where a gentleman named Yahweh Ben Yahweh has been arrested and 16 other members of his group in Miami, Florida. Mm-hmm. And they've been held without a bond, without going to trial since November of 1990.
How do you feel about that?
I feel that their human and civil rights have been violated and the constitutional rights have been violated.
Well, do you think it's possible that those violations can occur because of the views of the community which are not sympathetic?
I think the American public is not aware that it's a law on the book called the Bail Reform Act of 1984. And I think that certain issues don't get into the media, into the forefront of the media, so these type of things are happening. Mm-hmm. But,
well, thanks for sharing that news with us. Well, there's people out there that say they shouldn't get their rights, but hey, why have rights on the books if people can't have them?
Right. I mean, what happens if this man is proven innocent? What are they going to do about all the time that they served?
Okay. Well, thanks for your call. Michael, he does have a point about these issues not being in the media. What has the media response been to the trial, and can you give us an update about where you stand on it?
Okay, the trial begins September 30th in Buffalo, New York, which is the closest federal court to Attica Prison. The media has, because this is the 20-year anniversary of the Attica uprising and massacre, the media has had a series of recollections about what had happened, and they interviewed many of the prisoners and the guards and even the National Guard who came and some of the doctors. And I think that the media has really looked at Attica and tried to see how we can avoid future Atticas, and whether prisons have really changed, and whether or not we want to change prisons, or whether or not we want to have prisoners come back into the community with skills that they can prevent them from going back to crime. I think that's the real concern of everyone. They don't want to have people committing crime in the community. And the issue is, how do you avoid that? How do you stop the crime?
Well, that's a good point, and I think anything that doesn't get examined certainly won't get solved. I know you have to go soon, but we've got a couple more calls we'll take before we change focus. Hi, you're on Target.
Assalamu alaikum. All praise due to Allah for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
And
good evening, sister. Yes. I want to say about, you were focusing on Attica, one prison, but we black people here in the wilderness of North America live in the biggest prison on earth. We are here we are not humans, have them telling the brother mentioning Constitution and Bill of Rights, Civil Rights. Hey, that don't mean nothing. Nobody else on the planet needs civil rights, needs a Bill of Rights, needs amendments. Why do we need it? We have to remember when the Constitution was written, we, the black people, were not human. We were shadow. We were like the cow, the chicken, the horse. We were the property of our enemies, the white man.
All right, well, thanks for your call. You keep listening. He's putting it back to the slavery days. Everything does seem to go back to that at some point or the other. But we'll take another call talking about Attica, winding up this segment. Joining me on the live line is attorney Michael Deutsch, who is representing the inmates and their families in a class action lawsuit. Hi, you're on Target.
Good evening, sister. This is Brother Hondo. I'm just calling to say that a lot of the callers who called in tonight are really the ideological descendants of the black slave owners who expressed the relationship of black people who are trying to get into the capitalist system and try to, how you said, lift themselves up by them bootstraps or get ahead. I mean, the problem is that...
Don't say bootstraps. I've had it with that term.
Well, the problem is that we don't study history, and we have to understand that capitalism has never allowed a black capitalist class to grow to the point where it can actually become a force that these people are espousing how we're going to get ahead. So I'm sorry I'm losing my focus. But
well, I got your point, and I appreciate your call. It sounds as if you're talking about a certain ideological viewpoint that you detected on the behalf of some callers, and you're going back to the bigger economic issue, which always is a factor in things. One last call, and then concluding remarks from Attorney Deutsch. Hi, you're on Target.
How are you?
I'm fine. Who's on the line?
My name is Joyce.
Oh, hi, Joyce.
Okay, quickly. I happened to be, at that time, employed at Columbia Harlem Hospital in New York City.
Oh, my goodness.
My sister is, right now, I've long ago retired, but my sister is the coordinator for pediatric rehabilitation there right now. So we went up. It was a busload of us. This young man, he remembers. You see, there's no way that he could ever tell what went on up there to that prison.
Was it horrible?
it was worse than horrible. It was worse than horrible because they did not have to shoot in on those people like that. They did not have to do it. And a lot of times, the person who's in prison, and especially at Attica, is not a murderer. It's for another. Some of them are in there for other causes. So since a lot of the people here are comparing 20 years ago with today, surely anytime you violate someone else's rights, that makes you a criminal. By the same token, that doesn't make the other person right to violate the criminal's rights. Everybody has some kind of human rights.
And Joyce, the man who was here in the studio was by no means excusing his behavior.
Of course not. Of course not. And the thing about it, so many of the people the young men who have been released from up at Attica, my sister's still very active in it. We know 2 of them who have committed suicide.
Because of trauma they felt?
That's right. They never did get over it. Inasmuch as they are prisoners, and they have done wrong. They're still human. And I don't think that there's too many people who has murdered someone else that is happy about it. I just don't think that. And tonight my heart really goes out to the families that lost their loved ones, that were lost, as a result of the prisoners' activity, and also the ones who were in prison, because it was a lot of those boys that were killed. Young, 17, 18, 19, 20, up to about 25 years of age, who had not murdered anybody. So I'm hoping that this suit will do something. I don't think you'd ever get the sense over here in Chicago. We compare everything to Cook County. And the world is bigger than Chicago.
Well, Joyce, I hope that you are surviving a traumatic memory well yourself, and I really appreciate your sharing a little bit of living history with us by sharing your experience.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Michael, Joyce, another eyewitness, had just about the last word. Concluding remarks from you, and then I got to move on.
Well, I appreciate her comments because she's somebody that experienced what happened there, at least in some way, and I think anyone that was in Attica or had a loved one in Attica could not help but feel the trauma and the tragedy that occurred there. Those people who lost their lives did not have to lose their lives, and we have to prevent that type of activity, whether it occurs in the community or it occurs in the prisons, and that's what the lawsuit is about, to hold people who violate human rights accountable.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on the air to share with us. We will keep listening to see what the outcome will be, and then maybe we'll talk to you again.
Okay. Thanks, Sylvia.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
We had been talking with attorney Michael Deutsch, who is representing the Attica inmates and families in a class action lawsuit. And also we had been speaking with Mr. Akil Al-Jundi, who was in Attica. And a lot of people didn't really want to deal with the Attica issue because they are so concerned with the overwhelming crime that we face now. But it was a piece of history, and we got to share some of that with people who were there. So we're going to take a break. This is Sylvia Ewing. I'll be right back, and we'll be talking about some other stuff.
AM 1450, WVON.
Robert Ballinger and Frederick. What's your last name, Frederick?
Smith.
Frederick Smith. I know you didn't make that up.